Hello, I'm Dave Bolton and welcome to Under His Righteousness. Today's subject is science, so let's take a closer look at what it's all about. According to the dictionary, the root meaning of science equals knowledge. Scientific knowledge is based on the discovery of pre-existing laws and principles. An expansion of the root meaning equals systemized knowledge from observation, study and experimentation. Therefore, the true definition of science is that it is accurately defined as being a systemized knowledge from observation, study and experimentation, which also includes the discovery of pre-existing scientific laws and principles. The principle of the scientific method is accurately defined as the observation and monitoring of any given present object or present event and repeating the observed behaviour or conditions of that object or event by test to confirm true validation. This is how a scientific fact is established. However, science is limited to dealing only with present-day conditions and present-day observable behaviour of objects or events in order to establish a scientific fact. Any other method used that does not satisfy this basic scientific principle is unable to establish the results of that given method as a scientific fact. True science and history are directly interrelated and are inseparable. It is an absolute requirement that someone was present to observe firsthand and faithfully record any given actual event of past history. It is also an absolute requirement that any given record of past history be preserved, unaltered, and passed down through time for the benefit of future generations. This is how a historical fact is established. Archaeological discoveries that are consistent with known historical facts thus confirm the authenticity of the written historical record. In the same way, geological evidences being consistent with known historical facts also bear testimony to the authenticity of the written historical record. This is where true science and history interrelate. The true definition of science itself is based on unchanging, irrevocable scientific laws. These laws include the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of gravity and motion, and the law of cause and effect. No one has ever observed any exceptions to these laws. Science is utilised not only by laws but also with theories. However, where a theory violates these scientific laws, then it must be discarded if the scientist wishes to establish the truth. Theories that address current observable events by experimental means are required to repeat the tests in order to confirm that the results of that experiment are correct. However, any theory that attempts to address a hypothetical event from the unknown and unobservable past is absolutely unable to circumvent the scientific principle of the scientific method, and therefore is totally incapable of establishing its concept as a scientific fact. The laws of thermodynamics are as follows. The first law states that matter and energy within the universe cannot be created or destroyed. There is a fixed equivalence between matter and energy whereby the sum total cannot be changed. No one has ever observed any exceptions to this law. This law states that energy can be converted or changed from one form to another. However, the conversion does not cause any gain or reduction of energy. For example, a conversion of an electrical impulse to light and heat does not cause a gain or reduction in energy. In a similar fashion, matter is capable of changing its form. For example, a log of wood being burnt requires oxygen and is eventually transformed to ashes and gases. There is no overall gain or reduction of matter. The second law states that in an isolated system, spontaneous processes lead to a decrease in order. Energy, though remaining constant in quantity, is transported to a lower potential and becomes less available in productivity. No one has ever observed any exceptions to this law. This law equally applies to an open system which not only requires an input of energy, but an input of directed energy. In other words, energy plus information. However, when that directed energy ceases, the open system will spontaneously decay. What this means is that eventually everything that exists, whether it be organic or inorganic, moves from order to disorder. For example, this can be seen in neglected man-made structures, felled trees and old animals. The implications of this for the human race is that eventually our bodies wear out due to injury, disease or old age, and death is the result. The third law states that order is at maximum level at absolute zero temperature. Any addition of raw energy, for example a rise in temperature, will cause a reduction in order. No one has ever observed any exceptions to this law. An addition of raw undirected energy to an open system will only produce disorder or chaos. In other words, energy without information will not produce order but disorder. For example, if a racing car, while speeding on the racetrack, goes out of control and crashes into the tyre wall, there is a loss of information to the control of the car and a huge output of raw energy being expelled on impact. Needless to say that the racing car will sustain some damage. We now come to the laws of gravity and motion. The first law is that any given object will remain stationary or in consistent motion in a straight line unless it is affected by the action of an outside force. The constant velocity of a moving object is known as inertia. An example of the first law is that a motor vehicle will remain stationary until an outside force starts the engine and selects a gear and releases the handbrake, and the vehicle will then tend to move in a straight line unless an outside force is applied to the steering wheel. If a bicycle is being ridden and not steered by hand, it will also tend to go in a straight line. The second law is that an applied outside force will cause the velocity of any given object to change its momentum according to its mass. If the force affecting the object is increased, the object will gain momentum. If the mass of the object is decreased, then the motion of the object will decrease in velocity. For example, pressing on the accelerator of a motor vehicle will increase its speed of motion, and pressing on the brake pedal will decrease the speed of motion. Pushing hard on the pedals of a bicycle will increase its speed of motion, and squeezing on the brake levers on the handlebars will decrease the speed of motion. Brake pads lose mass when applied, and a punctured tyre also loses mass and causes the wheel to decrease in velocity. The third law is that for any action of a given object there is an equal and opposite reaction from other affected objects. In other words, if object number 1 exerts force on object number 2, there is an equal force from object number 2 that counteracts object number 1. For example, the combined gravitational forces of the Earth and the Moon keeps the Moon in orbit around the Earth. It therefore follows that the combined gravitational forces of the Sun and the Earth keeps the Earth in orbit around the Sun. We now come to the law of cause and effect. This law states that every effect must have a cause. This law also states that the effect cannot be greater in size or in kind than the cause. This law follows on from the first law of thermodynamics and is also encompassed in Newton's laws of motions. No one has ever observed any exceptions to the law of cause and effect. It therefore follows that every single effect that we observe, and those effects that are invisible to us in the whole of the universe, must have a cause. It therefore means that every effect originated from a first cause. To put it another way, if we apply the law of cause and effect to all these scientific laws and principles, scientifically and logically, the first cause must be a lawgiver. We now come to science and its origin. Science, to put it simply, is the observation of God's creation and the discovery of his laws which govern the universe, and discovering how God's creation functions, which at present is limited by the finite abilities and the fallen nature of man. It also includes the discovery of historical artifacts and inventions made by man. The Bible says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." And that's in John chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. Therefore, all the laws of science originated with God, from whom everything originated, including the moral law of right and wrong, which is hot-wired into the conscience of every human being on earth. Now in this chapter of John, the Bible explains who this person, the Word, is. Verse 14 says this: "The Word became flesh and lived for a while among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only begotten Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Verses 17 and 18 declare this: "For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but God, the only begotten Son, who is at the Father's side, has made him known." So it is Jesus who literally spoke the earth and the universe into existence in the beginning. The Bible therefore clearly states that God is the creator and originator of all creation. Well, I hope that this information has helped you to understand what science actually is and what its limitations are regarding to man's use of it, and what its valid connection is to the Bible. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for listening. May the Lord bless you.